Good morning. My full name is George Herbert Walker Bush. Before I became the 41st president, I was born in Milton, Massachusetts to Dorothy and Prescott Bush. My father was a banker who went on to represent Connecticut in the U.S. Senate from 1952 to 1963. I was raised in Greenwich, Connecticut, and eventually graduated in Andover, Massachusetts from the Phillips Academy. After I graduated, I joined the U.S. Naval Reserve to fight in World War II. I got my wings at the age of 19 and flew 58 combat missions, receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross for bravery. While on leave in the Navy, I met my wife, Barbara Bush, and later had 6 kids. I then completed my military service and enrolled in Yale University to study economics. I graduated in 1948 and moved me and my family to Texas and became the president of an offshore oil drilling company. In 1964, I won the Republican nomination for a U.S. Senate seat from Texas, but lost in the general election. 2 years later, I won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, where I served 2 terms. In 1970, I ran for the U.S. Senate, but again was defeated in the general election.
He had a background that set the stage for his position as president. President Richard Nixon appointed Bush the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, a role in which he served from 1971 to 1973, when he became chairman of the Republican Party. This was the beginning of his political career. He also gained invaluable experience in the White House as Reagan's vice president.
How did you deal with domestic issues during your presidency?
During my presidency, I was known as a moderate conservative. People said that I tried to continue Reagan's approach, but I also wanted a kinder and gentler nation, which included less harsh programs without radical change. In my inauguration address, I stated that I wanted to bring unity, diversity, and generosity to the American people.
So what was your position on the economy?
Well, I found that foreign policy objectives were more pressing during my presidency. However, in my inauguration address, I did mention that the problems of homelessness, crime, and drug addiction could be resolved by volunteerism and community involvement. I also tried to use my presidency to solve budget issues, but others said that it was because of this that I didn't do enough to mend the economy that I actually lost the presidential re-election.
We were privileged enough to get the opinion of Professor Andrew Hamilton from Harvard University to speak on President Bush's domestic policy.
I think that many Americans believe that President Bush did not focus enough on the domestic economy. Overall, the economic recession, large budget deficit, and his failure to deal with these issues overshadows his accomplishment in foreign policy in the eyes of many citizens.
So what type of laws did you promote?
Some laws that I promoted during my presidency for the welfare of the people were the Americans with Disability Acts of 1990, which prohibited discrimination based on disability, and the Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990, which was a response to the 10-gallon oil spill by Exxon in Alaska. I was able to control the spread of urban smog, decrease acid rain, and emission of harmful chemicals. As you can see, I sought to help a wide range of domestic issues, even though my main focus was more on the foreign policy side.
Personally, I thought that the 1990 Disability Act was Bush's greatest accomplishment. Even if he had bad relations with Congress, he did a great job with the resources he had, especially with foreign policy.
What is your foreign policy approach?
Foreign policy was one of the main focuses during my presidency. I ended the Cold War and was even credited with improving relations between the Soviet Union and the U.S. In 1991, I signed a strategic arms reduction treaty with Mikhail Gorbachev, and later I authorized the military operation in Panama and the Persian Gulf. I also helped Kuwait in driving the Iraqis out of their country. It was called the Persian Gulf War. I also created a new team of advisors: the National Security Advisor, Brent Scottwood, Secretary of State, James Baker, Secretary of Defense, Dick Cheney, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of the Staff, Colin Powell. With this team, I continued my belief of conservatism and pragmatism. This means that I took my time to decide what I did, but when I did, eventually I acted out the action with much determination.
Professor Andrew Hamilton, what did Bush do during specific events?
After Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein launched an invasion and occupation of Kuwait in August 1990 and threatened to invade Saudi Arabia, Bush organized a military coalition of more than 30 countries who began a U.S.-led air assault against Iraq in mid-January 1991. After 5 weeks of air offensive and 100 hours of ground offensive, Operation Desert Storm ended in late February with Iraq's defeat and Kuwait's liberation. A second event during Bush's presidency that I think is worth mentioning: Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989. While Bush condemned the government for its violence, he did not follow Congress's call for harsh punishment. This may have led to the further strife between the president and Congress, but Bush decided to only impose limited sanctions on China in the interest of restoring U.S.-China relationship as mutually beneficial trading partners.
Although the president had a monumental impact on foreign policy, his administration was involved in many controversies as well. His Secretary of the Treasury, Catalina Villalpando, was the only treasurer in United States history to be sent to prison. Officials caught her for tax evasion and obstruction of justice, diminishing public trust in the Bush administration. Furthermore, the president granted clemency to 5 government officials convicted during the Reagan presidency, launching thorough investigations into the matter.